right, how y'all feeling this afternoon? So I'm supposed to bring a religious perspective to this conversation. Amen. I'm Pentecostal. I love it when people speak back to me. How y'all feeling? I decided to name my portion to my contribution to this conversation, setting the atmosphere, music making, church, and autoeroticism on the Come album. Church, yes. As my colleagues before me, I listened to this album with attention to several connotations evoked by the title, Come. Of course, I anticipated a multi-referent expression of Come centered on euphoric experiences. And to frame my sort of thoughts about this, I'll play a little bit of music just for you to get a sense of the song that actually inspired this talk, which is Pheromone. I'll play a little bit of it.
I think you're just going to have to put the, yeah.
So, as many of you can tell, that was not pheromone, but it's still useful for our conversation. Yes. So, the many sort of connotations that of beckoning to get a person to be in close proximity to the speaker, the idea in my context of the offertory, where folks are petitioned to come and to demonstrate that they've been converted, particularly in Christian traditions, the connotation of sexual climax, and then of course the homonym for the material evidence of climax, come. In my thoughts, I'm going to use a womanist ethnomusicological lens to take seriously how these connotations connect and overlap between music making, sexual climax, the expression of creative energy, and spiritual transcendence. In particular, in my forthcoming book, I focus on the personal and imperceptible aspects of music making that are required to induce transcendence, such as the eroticism that is shared in the musical experiences of the creative, that is Prince in this case, the creator, and partakers. And in many ways, I'm continuing what LaMonda gestured toward in her reflections, this sort of multi-sensory aspect of music making for the artist. The Black Radio Quiet Storm format that she mentioned of mood music resembles the tradition within historically Black Pentecostal and gospel music practice of quote unquote setting the atmosphere, and the nascent related genre of gospel mood music. Has anyone heard gospel mood music? Anybody? I love that you are with me on today. So I want to think about setting the atmosphere in the gospel church and in the gospel boudoir or bedroom. Quote, being able to quickly find the address of God, end quote, was how multi-Grammy award-winning gospel music producer Donald Lawrence described the most prized musical competency in music ministry at the 2017 Hawkins Music and Arts conference in Chicago, Illinois. Within historically African American Pentecostal worship, a minister's or music minister's capability to get to God instantly and usher God's presence into worship seamlessly is referred to in the vernacular as setting the atmosphere. When music ministers set the atmosphere, they have prepared congregants to be receptive to the move of the Spirit through ministers' skillful interplay of message and music. However, setting the atmosphere is more than collectively experiencing the performative qualities of worship leaders' spiritual fire. Setting the atmosphere is also a theological, aesthetic, economic, and political enterprise during which participants negotiate style, sociocultural bias, and spiritual familiarity. Although Prince did not subscribe to Pentecostal belief, he did subscribe to faith traditions, Seventh-day Adventist, Jehovah's Witness, that have similar sexually conservative religious beliefs, and drew from the Pentecostal and gospel music traditions to take people there. That is happiness, joy, love-making, climax to heaven. His vocal musicality in particular is interesting to me because of what we call in vocal pedagogy his extended vocal range, his ability as a baritone to then flip into falsetto vocal stylings in order to paint a picture for us as listeners. In much of musicological research, the falsetto vocal style has been used as a sonic marker for climax, as has been mentioned. And then the baritone lower register of his voice is a way of simulating the sort of timbres that one might recall or anticipate in pillow talk. While the performance of gender and sexuality in gospel music has been rhetorically marked as taboo, discussion in historically African American Protestant congregations, there is a rich interdependence of these sorts of topics, gender and sexuality, that is exemplified by albums such as Sacred Love Songs by Bishop T.D. Jakes. Has anyone heard Sacred Love Songs? You are really with me today. I'm so excited about this. Can I take you with me? I mean, you are with me. I love it. So I want to give you all a sense of the sonic textures in that album, which emphasize the lower register or the baritone bass voice as a voice associated with the bedroom. However, in this case, the lower voice is a bishop. It's people's pastor. I know, it's interesting. What? Oh, came up twice. Let's just go straight to my iTunes, Saints and Friends. Let's see. Okay. So, like Prince, I love to bring this stuff into the academy. I'm trying to tell y'all, church is funny. So, this is gospel mood music, okay? Where am I? So this gospel mood music is intended for the believer to do a gospelized version of baby making as facilitated by Bishop Jakes. Sacred Love Songs is based on the Song of Solomon. It was marketed as gospel songs with the most, quote, romantic and poetic texts ever written, end quote. Jakes, a preacher, narrates intermittently throughout the album, much like what we hear on the Come album with these lower register whispered remarks. Over the track, you even heard the sweeping waves of water giving to us this sort of scenic imagery of perhaps lovemaking by the beach. Jakes, a preacher, narrates intermittently throughout the album, voicing a divine blessing on the marriage bed, and effectively cueing the act of procreative sex as an act of co-creation between presumably husband, wife, and God. Although there is a growing number of Christian same-sex marriages, most historically African American Protestant churches remain resistant to the movement. According to one iTunes review, the music is as healing as it is entertaining. Sacred Love Songs encourages men and women to love each other in God's way with heartfelt musical messages. And I should note here that Bishop Jakes is not the only one who is trying to bring God into the bedroom. Here are some other albums. The first is his, and then the other two are by Kim Burrell and Fred Hammond. The Jakes album includes collaborations with popular R&B and gospel artists such as Tamar Braxton, Shirley Murdoch, Jesse Powell, and Marvin Sapp. But the prominence given to Jakes' own deeper male voice as both speaker and singer draws upon gendered hierarchies of authority to reestablish the lower baritone-based timbres as the conventional sound for the sexual healing of African American Christian believers. The ambivalent reception of Sacred Love Songs and other similar recordings indicates both the success with which Jakes harnesses the erotic potential of gospel music and the discomfort that such an explicit acknowledgement of sonic eroticism causes for many religious gospel listeners, as it marks a glaring demographic omission in the project's potential impact. There is no exploration of virgin, celibate, queer, or sensual listening to and feeling of gospel music through forms of sensory modalities, vision, audition, olfaction, gustation, tactility, and motion, in order to deepen love and spirituality in charismatic Christian social life. Furthermore, there is no consideration of the pleasure vocalists themselves may derive, concurrently maintaining the sort of Christian piety expected in these sorts of sexually conservative communities, while providing forms of musical sexual healing for others. So in my own work, which is forthcoming this year in the Women in Music Journal, I follow the work of Suzanne Cusick and Philip Brett and others by teasing out the ways in which gospel singing and other forms of singing is understood as erotic and sensual in and of itself for heterosexual, non-heterosexual, and all of the sexual activity in between believers for who are both performers and listeners. I ask what we might learn about the pleasure derived from the auditory and bodily dimensions of gospel music making, and contend that sexual abstinence that is often promoted in these settings, these discourses obscure the alternative forms of sensual and sexual exploration occurring in gospel music participation. For example, within vocal performance and pedagogy, there's often a discussion within the sort of teacher-student relationship where pleasurable, painful, and ambiguous, sexually suggestive, and even vulgar descriptions of stimulation in the erogenous zones. So that would include the larynx, the armpits, the sacrum, the groin, etc. Stimulation in these zones in order to achieve particular sounds. These sensations are believed to be a way of gauging how a person is singing well, relying on various configurations of memory and imagination. I'll pause here and say that you might be wondering, okay, well, what does that communication look like? Well, in my ethnography, drawing on my own experience as a trained singer, I would ask my informants who were sought after musicians, what were some of the strategies that you had to achieve that particular technically difficult passage? For example, some women might say, and brace yourself for some sort of crass explanations, but some women might say anything from my instructor or my coach told me to lift my girls. One opera singer told me that she was told to sing from her pubic hair. She was told, no, I'm telling you, she holds firm to that. One person said that they were told in order to breathe well, they need to take their air in where they take their man in. And some men have said things like they were told to squeeze their buttocks, which is, of course, anal stimulation. Others have been told to sing from their balls. So all of which are erogenous zones that are meant to not only stimulate folks, or are not only areas of arousal for sexual activity, but are also believed to be regions where folks can tap into making particular sound qualities. To teach good singing, deep breathing, resonance, intonation, folks use these sorts of metaphors to relate how sound production and other sensations are perceived in the body. With these inner workings in mind, Prince's pheromone points toward this same interconnectivity that emphasizes the chemical reactions of the body generated not just for love making, but also in the intimate space of music making and consumption. And so as we use our bodies as musicians through vocalism, through vocality and instrumental participation, there are also ways in which our chemical makeup contribute to setting the atmosphere. Like in the mechanism of using singing, one has to stimulate the hedonic hotspots of the body to generate and secrete pheromones. And this activation is required in both the religious and non-religious domains of music performance, regardless of one's aspirations of being sexually active or sexually muted. And so as we turn to our conversation, I would like to explore these connections, how these connections may relieve the stigma surrounding related forms of euphoria beyond music making that musicians have been known to pursue, and in many ways they have been known to become addicted to. We know this not only through the narrative of Prince, but other forms of euphoria that are naturally, musically, and drug-induced were pursued by other icons such as Whitney Houston and Michael Jackson. My hope is that we can start to think about this sort of alluring danger of making people commoditize their ability to use their body to set the atmosphere in the music-making enterprise. Thank you.